Welcome back to Live from Paris. It's time now for Campaign Chronicles, our daily look at the race to be France's next president. The two leading candidates, François Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy, have dominated the headlines so far, but just behind them, the race for third place is hotting up. Far-right candidate Marine Le Pen, centrist François Bayrou, and far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon are all close to 15% in the polls and all frantically chasing the hope of shaking up the race with a surprise entry into the second round. For more on this, I'm joined now by our press reviewer, Elena Casas. Hello, Elena.
Hello, Lorna.
Right, so why is there's so much interest in who's coming third?
Well, because it's all started to be rather unpredictable at that end of the polls. 3 different polls Libération reports today were published in the last week, which all put a different candidate in third place. One has Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the far-left candidate, coming through and scoring as much as 16% in the polls. That's pretty surprising when you consider he's leading a coalition of far-left groups, including the Communist Party, and that just, 2 months ago he was around 6 or 7%. He's nearly tripled that in a couple of months. So obviously something about his discourse, something about the way he talks about the economic crisis, about making the bankers and the people who caused it pay for it, something about his desire to tax the rich more, something about that line of quite, strong, hard left economics is appealing to the part of the French who feel that mainstream politicians, even in the Socialist Party, just don't quite understand how hard they're finding it to get to the ends of the month and, how much extra help they need. Now, there's another poll which has got the far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, making a breakthrough and getting up as much as 16%. Now, she's not actually had as much of a bounce in the polls as many pundits have thought or feared, you could even say, after the Toulouse attacks of last week. Lots of people widely said, I said so myself last week, that it looked very much like she would be able to profit from the fact that that attacker turned out to be an Islamist, and as a result see a rise in her poll figures. Now, she has certainly done her best to campaign on this issue. Here's some of the remarks she made about them yesterday.
How many Mohammed Merads are there arriving in France each day by planes and boats? How many Mohammed Merads are there among the 300 illegal immigrants who arrive each day in Greece via Turkey, their first point of entry in the EU?
How many more Mohammed Merads could be arriving in France? That's what she said. Really pretty strong words there. And newspapers do say that she could then see a backlash as a result of that, they are quite strongly racially charged words and that they will clearly upset some people. Now, of course, there's a third person in the race to be third, if you like. The centrist François Bayrou. He came third last time in 2007 with 18%. That made headlines at the time because it was a shock good result. But he's finding it hard to repeat it this time round. He gave a big campaign meeting yesterday at the Zénith in Paris, but the Nouvel Observateur reports that he's finding it hard to get through in a debate that's become increasingly polarised. He's actually quite popular, so he gets as many as 70% of the French saying that they like him, but liking him, he doesn't offend anyone, isn't quite the same as translating into people actually wanting to vote for you. As the debate becomes more polarised between left and right, he's finding it hard to tread a line, but he's trying to make himself stand out as much as possible from the other two candidates. He was talking a lot about Mohamed Merah yesterday at that meeting, and he said instead of talking about law and order like the other candidates, maybe France should stop, take a moment to reflect and think about how it created an environment in which a man felt so excluded that it pushed him to do this.
OK, but is this line working for him?
Well, he's working in some lines, in some ways rather. He himself is not doing very well in the polls, but the Huffington Post points out today that some of his campaign themes, his own ideas, have been taken up by all the other candidates. So his ideas are playing well, even if you like, he himself is not. And of course, the key one of those ideas is made in France. He was the first to say that we should be looking at policies to try and stop firms outsourcing their production abroad, and said encouraging companies to make in France. But how easy is it actually to produce things in France? I went to find out. Here on the Champs-Élysées are a lot of France's most famous fashion names, but many of them no longer make anything in this country. This small fashion house still does 100% of its production in small ateliers here in Paris, but CEO Amy Ivary says the famous savoir-faire they rely on is dying out.
The numbers speak for themselves. There were 1 million people working in textiles and fashion in France, and now there are 5,000. Someone has to try and revive that creativity which we're losing every day.
She isn't very impressed with politicians' attempts to save it either.
No, not at all. They're a long way from the reality of the problems small businesses have, especially when they're just starting up and hoping to develop.
A few steps down the fashion price chain, Hélène Leroy owns nightwear business Bluet. Here all the sewing is done in-house. She used to use local workshops, but they kept going out of business. She blames inconsistent politicians.
We're ready to engage with them. If they help, that's great, but the danger is the law changes all the time. So you base yourself on something to hire someone, saying, yes, I can afford this, because there's help and tax breaks. Then suddenly there's no help and no tax breaks.
The problem, as Leroy admits, her product is still pretty high-end. Pyjamas start at €60, and the cost of labour in France means she can't really bring that price down. But are French customers really prepared to pay more?
Firstly, I have a real respect for French production and a real faith in the French ability to produce at a fair cost. So there are fair profit margins and a decent price.
It depends on what. I produce in France myself. I make things and sell them in France. So I should defend it. But I know people who can't afford it and just buy things made in China. Well, they have to think of their wallets.
That, of course, is the problem. Made in France might be a vote winner, but in tough times, people just can't afford to put their money where their votes are.
I look there at Made in France. Well, thanks very much indeed, Elena, for that look at the third man candidates in this French presidential election. And you can catch Elena at this time every weekday. That is at 9:50 Paris time here on Live from Paris. That's just about all from us for now. But don't go away. More headlines coming up right after the international weather next here on France 24.